Dad reads Sci-fi. The Legacy of Heorot, Chapter 9. Contact. A man that studieth revenge keeps his own wounds green. Francis Bacon. In the shadows beyond the fence, something watched. Something alive, silent, almost motionless, save for the rise and fall of its torn and bleeding flanks. The creature was badly hurt. It had passed the horizon of pain into territory that was strange indeed. Irreversible changes had taken place in its body. In a distant way, it even understood that it was dying. But first there was an obligation. It hid in the shadowed fields, beyond the reach of the searchlights. When it concentrated, it could smell the man, the one who had hurt it. This one, whom it had badly underestimated, was the real threat, and every instinct screamed for it to get to him, to find and kill him. It began to wiggle forward. It lay between rows of corn, just a few dozen meters southwest of the colony. The searchlights still swept across the ground, and the men still walked the edge of the camp. How to get past the fire vines? It moaned hungrily. In the next instant, the solution presented itself. One of the men ran his forepaw along a section of vine. He touched it, leaned on it. It recognized the section. This was the same stretch of fire vine that had bitten it before. It seemed safe now. Perhaps fire vines could only bite once. The man was alone, and not even looking in its direction. Now, as the searchlights crisscrossed, there was a moment in which darkness was almost total, when shadow licked the fence, the man, and a stretch leading almost to the fields. It moved. It moved as fast as a skeeter, skimming at low altitude, moved so fast that the man at the fence hardly had time to look up, had no time to scream before it hit the fence with such a momentum that the aluminum fence post buckled and the line snapped, that its impact slammed him back into the wall of the veterinary clinic. His head dimpled the sheet metal and rebounded directly into the creature's flailing, spiked tail. It shook the man's head free of the spikes, let the corpse slide to the ground. It flowed onward, a quarter ton of rippling muscle and bone, black as a shadow, as dark and fluid as the river flowing behind and beneath the bluff, as much a part of the night as the stars or the twin moons. The creature nudged the door open. It sniffed tentatively at first, then entered. There was a little light inside, but it needed less than it found. Animals were caged along the walls. Curiosity was almost as intense as the pain and resolve, and it stopped for a moment to peer up into one of the cages. A small white shape curled up in the corner, hidden in a mass of wood shavings. The tiny alien stirred slowly, then jerked to wakefulness, staring, blinking its tiny red eyes. The creature had seen that look before, many times before. Total submission, a trembling readiness, the prey's acknowledgement that it was ready to be food. No running, no fighting, its heart ready to burst before it was ever touched. Not now. The creature could smell the man, and it turned toward the smell. The man lay on a table. He moaned softly and moved limbs that seemed tangled in short vines. That was just as well. It had no urge to play with this one. It braced its paws on the table, stretching, feeling the hurts in its body, the pain along its sides where it was burned and torn. The long wound in its flank opened again, trickling fluid. It braced itself and tried to jump up onto the table. The table was not a boulder. It tilted. The safety blocks on the wheels popped free, and the table skidded across the room, tubes ripping free of the man's forelimb. Dark fluid sprang as they crashed into the wall, and the table flipped onto its side. As the table thudded to the floor, the man's eyes fluttered open. Their eyes met. Here it was. Here was the moment it craved. Here was the moment when the hunger and the pain and the anger vanished, and it saw into those eyes as down a deep, chill waterhole, a bottomless grotto. The man's eyes grew wide enough to sink in, to swim in. The creature drew closer. This was the deadly one. His skin was so soft, so fragile. It pawed experimentally, raking away flesh. Blood streamed from pinkish pulp beneath. The man grimaced, showed his teeth. Small teeth, flat and harmless. The man was so weak, and yet he had heard it as nothing else in its short life. The man was at the moment of death, his limbs bound, drawing back as far as he could, shrinking against the table, but his eyes held nothing of submission. His sluggish muscles struggled in the bonds. So much had changed so quickly in its life, and this one man had been at the center of so much of it, ended now. But his eyes, they met its own so steadily, helpless, bound, about to die, and yet, there was a scream from outside, and a sound of pounding feet. Its attention was split by confusion and uncertainty. It turned back to the man and saw triumph in his eyes, and it knew that somehow he had won. They would win, and that its life was over. Pain bit into the back of its head, and it spun as a second bullet missed it by inches. It charged directly at the man holding a long stick which spat fire. It felt another, awful pain, and then it was on him, his head in its mouth. There was a moment of bony resistance to its jaw muscles, then splintering collapse and softness. It spat him out and rushed for the door, if it could reach the river. But the doorway was crowded with men and their fire sticks. It howled its agony, reversed directions, flailing its tail at them, feeling the pain bite deep until the thing in its body triggered, and the entire world seemed made of blood. It exploded in the other direction. There were more of the vine-like things and small metal objects. Strange smells filled the room as liquid spilled. The walls of this cave were thin and bulged when the tail struck them. Instantly it wheeled. The head smashed at the thin walls. Something ripped open. An entire corner fell away. Outside was night, and the chance to find the river, to shed the heat that was cooking it from inside. One man blocked its way, and it slammed its tail into him, his spikes piercing its leg. It couldn't shake him loose. He screamed and screamed, confusing and slowing it, even with speed raging in its body and fire raging in its mind. Another flick of the tail smashed him against the corner of the building. It pulled its spikes free, leaving him leaking and moaning on the ground. But the men were everywhere now, and it ran this way and that, plowing into them, its body spasming, out of control, blind with the blood in its eyes.